A widow with empty pockets and a dead husband's debts stepped off a supply wagon in the middle of nowhere, staring at 15 rough men who didn't want her there. 1 week to prove she could cook or get thrown back into the dust. No second chances, no mercy, just survival. If you want to see how far a woman can go when she's got nothing left to lose, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wagon lurched to a stop, and Evelyn Hart felt the jolt all the way up her spine. Dust rose in pale clouds around the wheels, settling slowly over her worn boots and the single trunk that held everything she still owned. She didn't move right away. Her hands gripped the splintered edge of the wagon bed, knuckles white, because letting go meant stepping into a life she hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. "This is it, ma'am," the driver said without looking back. His voice was flat, like he'd said the same thing 100 times to 100 other desperate souls. "Iron Ridge Ranch, you getting out or not?" Evelyn exhaled slowly and forced her fingers to release. "I'm getting out." She climbed down carefully, her skirt catching on a nail. She yanked it free without bothering to check the tear. What did it matter? The dress was already faded, patched in 3 places, and too loose around the waist. She'd lost weight over the past year. Grief had a way of stealing appetite along with everything else. The ranch stretched out before her like a challenge. Low buildings made of rough timber and stone crouched against the land, functional and unforgiving. Corrals held horses that looked as hard-worked as the men who rode them. Beyond the main structures, the wilderness pressed in, dense forest on one side, open grassland on the other, and mountains in the distance that seemed to watch with cold indifference. A man stepped out from the largest building, and Evelyn knew immediately he was the one who'd decide her fate. He was tall, lean in the way of someone who worked from dawn until dark, and his face showed no hint of welcome. Dark hair, sun-worn skin, and eyes that measured her like she was livestock at auction. "You the cook?" he asked. "I'm Evelyn Hart." "That doesn't answer my question." She straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I'm the cook." He studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself not to look away. She'd learned that much in the past year. Never let them see you flinch. "Name's Caleb Morgan," he said finally. "Foreman here. You'll answer to me." "Understood." "You ever cooked for a crew this size?" Evelyn hesitated, and that hesitation cost her. She saw it in the way his expression shifted, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "I've managed a household," she said carefully. "I can handle a kitchen." "A household." He said it like the words tasted bitter. "This isn't some parlor tea service, Mrs. Hart. You'll be feeding 15 men 3 times a day, every day. They work hard, they eat more, and they don't have patience for mistakes." "Then I won't make mistakes." Caleb's mouth tightened. "We'll see. You've got 1 week to prove you can do the job. If you can't, you're gone. No extensions, no second chances. Understood?" "Understood." He turned without another word and walked toward the cookhouse. Evelyn grabbed her trunk and followed, dragging it through the dirt because there was no one to help, and she wouldn't have asked even if there was. The cookhouse was larger than she'd expected, but in worse condition. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the space was dominated by a massive iron stove that looked like it had survived a war. Rough wooden tables lined one wall, benches worn smooth by years of use. Pots and pans hung from hooks, some dented, most blackened with use. A counter ran along the back wall, scarred and stained. "Kitchen's yours," Caleb said, standing in the doorway. "Supplies are in the larder through that door. First meal's at sunup. Don't be late." "What do they usually eat?" "Whatever you can manage not to burn." He left before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone in the cookhouse, listening to the silence settle around her like a weight. She walked slowly through the space, taking inventory. The stove needed cleaning. The larder was better stocked than she'd feared. Flour, salt pork, beans, dried vegetables, a few jars of preserves. But everything was organized with the logic of men who didn't cook, which meant no logic at all. She found a broom in the corner and started sweeping. The physical work felt good, purposeful. Dust and old food scraps piled up as she moved methodically from one end of the room to the other. When the floor was clean, she tackled the stove, scrubbing away layers of grease and ash until her arms ached. By the time the sun started sinking toward the mountains, she'd made the space functional. Not pretty, but functional. She'd also made a plan for the morning meal: biscuits, gravy, fried salt pork, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Simple food, the kind men like these would expect. She was checking the stove's firebox when the door creaked open. A young man stepped inside, maybe 19 or 20, with sandy hair and a nervous energy that made him seem younger. He stopped when he saw her, clearly surprised. "You're the new cook," he said. "I am. I'm Luke. I usually help with the wood and water, for the kitchen, I mean." Evelyn straightened, brushing soot from her hands. "That's good to know. I'll need both." Luke nodded quickly. "I'll bring wood now. Water barrels are full, but I can top them off if you need." "Wood first. Thank you." He disappeared and returned a few minutes later with an armload of split logs. He stacked them neatly by the stove, working with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this 100 times. "The last cook," Luke said suddenly, then stopped. "What about him?" "It was a him. Old guy named Pete. He quit, or got fired. I'm not sure which." "Why?" Luke shifted uncomfortably. "The men complained, said the food was bad. Pete said they were ungrateful. It got ugly." "How ugly?" "Somebody threw a plate. Pete threw a pot. Mr. Morgan had to step in." Luke looked embarrassed. "I probably shouldn't have told you that." "I'm glad you did." He nodded and headed for the door, then paused. "They're not bad men, ma'am, just hard. Life out here makes people that way." "I understand." After he left, Evelyn sat down on one of the benches and let herself feel the exhaustion she'd been holding back. Her husband had died 14 months ago. Heart failure, the doctor said, though Evelyn suspected it was the whiskey and cigars that did most of the killing. Either way, he'd left her with nothing but debts and a house that belonged to the bank. She tried to hold on, sold everything of value, took in sewing, cleaned houses for families who'd once invited her to dinner parties. None of it was enough. The bank took the house. Her so-called friends stopped calling. In 6 months, she'd gone from comfortable widow to desperate woman with no prospects and nowhere to turn. Then she'd seen the advertisement in a weeks-old newspaper someone had left on a bench. Cook needed for ranch crew. Remote location. Room and board provided. Inquire Iron Ridge Ranch, Redwood Crossing. She'd written immediately, lying about her experience because desperation made liars of honest people. To her surprise, they'd written back with travel instructions and a start date. No interview, no references required. Just show up and prove you can do the work. So here she was, sitting in a cookhouse at the edge of nowhere, betting everything on her ability to feed men who'd already run off one cook. Evelyn stood and walked to the larder. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. Better to be ready. The first fingers of dawn were just touching the mountains when Evelyn lit the stove. The wood caught quickly and she fed the fire carefully, building it up until the heat filled the cookhouse. She mixed biscuit dough with cold hands, working quickly, cutting rounds and setting them on a greased pan. The salt pork went into a heavy skillet, sizzling and spitting as the fat rendered out. She'd made gravy 1,000 times in her old life, standing in a kitchen 3 times this size with a stove that heated evenly and ingredients that didn't come out of barrels. This was different. The flour was coarser, the drippings more intense, the whole process cruder. But she adjusted, tasting and correcting, adding water when it got too thick, more salt when it needed bite. The biscuits went into the oven. The coffee boiled in a massive pot that looked like it could caffeinate a small army. Everything was ready when she heard boots on the porch. Not one pair, but many. A stampede of hungry men who pushed through the door without ceremony. Caleb was first. He looked at the food laid out on the tables, then at her, but said nothing. The others followed, ranging in age from Luke's fresh-faced youth to grizzled men in their 50s with weathered faces and suspicious eyes. They sat without greeting her, reaching for plates and utensils with the single-minded focus of people who viewed eating as fuel rather than pleasure. Evelyn stood by the stove and watched them eat. No one spoke. The only sounds were forks scraping plates, coffee being poured, the occasional grunt that might have been approval or simple acknowledgement of food's existence. One man, broad-shouldered with a thick beard, took a biscuit and bit into it. He chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for another. Others followed his lead. The gravy disappeared. The salt pork vanished. Someone asked for more coffee, and Luke jumped up to pour it. When they finished, they filed out as silently as they'd entered. Only Caleb remained, standing near the door with his arms crossed. "You'll do breakfast tomorrow at the same time," he said. "All right." Lunch is at noon. Pack it up, sandwiches or whatever travels. They eat in the field. Understood. Dinner's at sundown. Hot food. Plenty of it. I can manage.
This story was
He
posted on the
studied her
channel
again with
west
that
of
same
Betrayal.
measuring look.
Please do not
You
repost
did
it
fine
in
this
any
morning.
form.
Don't let it go to your head. One good meal doesn't mean you've earned your place. I know. He left, and Evelyn was alone with a mountain of dirty dishes. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn, light the stove, cook breakfast, clean up, prepare lunch, pack it into baskets, and hand it off to Luke. Use the afternoon to plan dinner, to scrub surfaces that never seemed to get fully clean, to take inventory of supplies that dwindled faster than she'd expected. Cook dinner, serve it to silent men who ate like they were racing each other, clean up again. By the third day, her hands were cracked and raw. By the fifth, she'd burned herself twice on the stove and cut her thumbs slicing onions. By the seventh, she felt like she'd aged 10 years. But she didn't quit. She couldn't afford to. The men remained distant. They ate her food but offered no praise, no acknowledgement beyond empty plates. Caleb watched her with the same careful scrutiny, waiting for her to fail. She felt the pressure of it constantly, the knowledge that one bad meal, one mistake, could send her back to nothing. On the 8th morning, she was mixing dough when the door banged open. One of the older ranch hands, a man named Dutch, stood in the doorway, his face tight with pain. His right arm hung at an odd angle, and blood seeped through his shirt. "Where's Morgan?" Dutch asked through gritted teeth. "I don't know." Evelyn dropped the dough and crossed to him. "What happened?" "Horse threw me. Hit a rock wrong." He swayed slightly. "Need to find Morgan." "Sit down." "I need—" "Sit. Now." Something in her voice made him obey. He dropped onto the nearest bench, breathing hard. Evelyn grabbed a clean cloth and pressed it against the bleeding on his arm. Not the arm that was broken, that needed different attention. "Luke," she called. "Luke, get in here." The boy appeared a moment later, eyes wide when he saw Dutch. "Jesus." "Get Caleb. Right now." Luke ran. Evelyn turned back to Dutch, examining the injured arm more carefully. It wasn't a clean break. She could see the bone pushing against the skin, distorting the shape of his forearm. He needed a doctor, but the nearest town was a day's ride away. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly. "What are you—" She didn't give him time to finish. She gripped his arm firmly, felt for the break, and pulled. The bone shifted back into alignment with a sound that made her stomach turn. Dutch howled, a raw animal sound of pain that filled the cookhouse. Caleb burst through the door with Luke right behind him. "What the hell?" "He needs a splint," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "And a doctor, but a splint first." Caleb stared at Dutch's arm, now straight but already swelling. "You said it?" "Someone had to." "Where did you learn—" "My husband broke his leg once. The doctor showed me how to stabilize it until he could properly set it." She didn't mention that her husband had been drunk when he fell down the stairs, or that the doctor had been more interested in his fee than teaching her anything. She'd learned by watching, by remembering, because she'd had no choice. Caleb grabbed clean wood from the stack by the door and handed it to her. She worked quickly, patting Dutch's arm with cloth and securing the splints with strips torn from an old apron. Her hands didn't shake. They couldn't afford to. When she finished, Dutch was pale and sweating, but the arm was immobilized. Caleb helped him stand. "Get him to the bunkhouse," Caleb told Luke. "Make him comfortable. I'll ride for the doctor." They left, supporting Dutch between them. Evelyn stood alone in the cookhouse, staring at her hands. They were shaking now, hard tremors she couldn't control. She sat down before her legs could give out. The door opened again. Caleb stepped inside, alone this time. "The doctor will set it properly," he said. "I know. You did good. Probably saved his arm." Evelyn looked up at him, surprised by the words. His expression was still guarded, but something had shifted in his eyes. A grudging respect, maybe. Or at least the absence of outright skepticism. "I did what needed doing," she said. "Most people freeze when something like that happens." "I'm not most people." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No, I'm starting to see that." He left to prepare for the ride to town. Evelyn sat in the cookhouse, listening to her own breathing, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away. She'd proven something today. To Caleb, maybe to the others, but mostly to herself. She could survive this. She would survive this. Word spread fast on a ranch. By dinner that evening, every man knew what had happened. They filed into the cookhouse as usual, but something was different. A few nodded to her as they entered. One, a quiet man named Tom, actually said thank you when she handed him his plate. It wasn't much, but it was something. Caleb returned late after the others had eaten. Evelyn had kept a plate warm for him. He sat alone at the table eating slowly, and she noticed the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. "Doctor says Dutch will be fine," Caleb said without looking up. "Arm will heal clean. He'll be back to work in a few weeks." "That's good." "He also said you did a hell of a job with the splint. Asked where you learned field medicine." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're a widow who answered a job posting and turned out to be more capable than anyone expected." Evelyn leaned against the counter, too tired to stand without support. "Am I still on probation?" Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "No," he said. "You've earned your place." Relief hit her so hard she had to close her eyes. When she opened them, Caleb was still watching her. "You never told me," he said, "why you came here. A woman like you, educated, capable, you had options." "No, I didn't." "Debt?" "Among other things." He nodded slowly. "Everyone here is running from something or toward something, sometimes both. You don't have to explain if you don't want to." "Thank you." He finished his meal and stood carrying his plate to the wash basin. Before he left, he paused in the doorway. "Welcome to Iron Ridge, Mrs. Hart." After he was gone, Evelyn sat down at the table and let herself cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from the sheer overwhelming relief of knowing she had a place to stay, a job that was hers, a future that extended beyond tomorrow. The rhythm of ranch life began to feel less foreign. Evelyn learned the preferences of the crew, who liked their coffee black, who wanted extra gravy, who had an allergy to onions. She learned which mornings would be busier because the men were heading out to distant pastures, and which evenings would be quieter because only a skeleton crew stayed behind. Luke became her shadow in the kitchen, helping with dishes and wood and any task she needed done. He talked while he worked, filling the silence with stories about the ranch, about the men, about the land. "Mr. Morgan doesn't talk much," Luke said one afternoon while scrubbing pots. "Not since his wife died." Evelyn paused in chopping vegetables. "I didn't know he'd been married. Long time ago, maybe 10 years. I wasn't here yet, but folks talk. She died giving birth. Baby too. He hasn't been the same since. That's heartbreaking." "Yeah." Luke scrubbed harder at a stubborn bit of burned food. "Some of the men think that's why he's so hard on people. Like he forgot how to be any other way." Evelyn thought about Caleb's guarded expression, the careful distance he kept from everyone. Grief did that to people. She knew that better than most. "He's a good foreman, though," Luke continued. "Fair. Doesn't ask anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. And he keeps this place running, which isn't easy." "No, I imagine it isn't." As the weeks passed, Evelyn began to understand the delicate ecosystem of the ranch. Everything depended on everything else. The horses on the men who cared for them, the men on the food she provided, the food on supplies that came irregularly from town, the supplies on money earned from cattle sales that happened once a season. One broken link could unravel the whole operation. She also began to understand Caleb. He checked the cookhouse every few days, ostensibly to review supplies, but she suspected he was really checking on her. He'd ask quiet questions. Did she have everything she needed? Were any of the men giving her trouble? Had she noticed anything that needed fixing? She answered honestly, and he always followed through. One evening after dinner, he lingered while she cleaned up. The other men had gone, and Luke had already headed to the bunkhouse. "Storm coming," Caleb said, standing near the window. Evelyn looked out and saw dark clouds gathering over the mountains. "How long?" "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. It'll be bad when it hits. We're preparing now, securing buildings, moving the horses closer, stocking up." "What do you need from me?" "Same as always, keep the men fed, but we might be stuck inside for a few days once it starts, so plan accordingly." "I can do that." He nodded but didn't leave. Evelyn continued washing dishes. aware of his presence but not uncomfortable with it. "You've done well here," he said finally.
This story
"Better
was
than I
posted on
expected.
the channel west
Thank
of
you.
Betrayal.
I mean
Please
it.
do not repost
The
it
men,
in any
they're
form.
not easy to please, but they respect you. That matters." Evelyn dried her hands and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "All right. Why did you hire me? You clearly had doubts about whether I could do the job. You could have kept looking, found someone with more experience." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Your letter was honest. You didn't oversell yourself. You just said you needed the work and would do your best. Everyone else who applied, they all claimed to be the best cook in 3 counties, promised things they couldn't deliver. You were the only one who sounded like you understood what you were getting into." "Did I? Maybe not entirely. But you didn't run when you found out. That counts for more than experience." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both looked toward the window. The storm was moving faster than expected. "You should get to the bunkhouse," Evelyn said, "before the rain starts." "Yeah," but he didn't move. "Mrs. Hart, Evelyn, please." He hesitated, then nodded. "Evelyn, if things get rough during the storm, if you need anything, send Luke. Don't try to manage on your own." "I won't." He left, and Evelyn watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the main building. Lightning flickered in the clouds, illuminating his silhouette for a moment before the darkness swallowed him. She finished cleaning and secured the cookhouse, checking the windows and making sure everything loose was put away. Then she climbed the narrow stairs to the small room above the kitchen that served as her quarters. It wasn't much. A bed, a trunk, a single chair, but it was hers. She sat on the bed and listened to the wind picking up outside, rattling the shutters. Tomorrow, the storm would come. Tomorrow, she'd face whatever challenges it brought. But tonight, she was safe. She was fed. She had a purpose. For now, that was enough. The storm hit just after dawn. Evelyn woke to the sound of rain hammering the roof, wind screaming around the corners of the building. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, lighting the stove by the gray light filtering through the windows. The men came in soaked and irritable, water dripping from their coats. They'd been up since before sunrise, securing the last of the livestock and checking the buildings. Now they crowded into the cookhouse, seeking warmth and food. Evelyn served hot coffee and thick porridge, biscuits and fried ham. The men ate without their usual silence, talking in low voices about the storm, about what still needed to be done, about how long it might last. Caleb appeared mid-morning, drenched despite his oilskin coat. He hung it by the door and accepted the coffee Evelyn poured for him. "How's it look?" one of the older hands asked. "Bad? Getting worse? We've got a leak in the north barn. I need 3 men to help patch it." "In this weather?" "In this weather. The horses are in there. We can't let it get worse." 3 men volunteered without hesitation. They finished their coffee and followed Caleb back into the storm. Evelyn watched them go, worry tightening her chest. The day dragged on. The storm intensified, rain turning to hail that clattered against the roof like gravel. Wind tore at the buildings, and Evelyn heard something crash in the distance. A door coming loose, maybe, or part of a fence. She kept the stove burning, kept coffee hot, kept food ready. Men came and went, always wet, always cold, always hungry. She fed them and sent them back out without question. By evening, exhaustion showed in every face. Caleb returned covered in mud, a nasty cut across his cheek. He waved off her concern, downing coffee in 3 long swallows. "We lost part of the corral fence," he said. "Horses are secure, but we'll need to rebuild. And the roof on the equipment shed is leaking. We've done what we can for now." "Is it safe to stop?" "For tonight. Storm should break by morning." The men ate dinner in shifts, too tired for conversation. When the last group finished, Caleb sent them all to the bunkhouse. Luke tried to stay to help clean up, but Evelyn shooed him away. "You've done enough. Get dry and get some rest." After Luke left, Caleb helped her carry dishes to the wash basin. She tried to protest, but he ignored her. "You've been on your feet all day," he said. "Least I can do is help clean up." They worked in companionable silence, the storm still raging outside. When the last dish was clean, Evelyn noticed Caleb touching the cut on his face, wincing slightly. "Sit down," she said. "Let me look at that." "It's fine." It's not. Sit. He obeyed, and she fetched clean water and cloth. The cut wasn't deep, but it needed cleaning. She worked carefully, aware of his closeness, of the way he held very still while she tended the wound. You should have let me look at this earlier, she said. I was busy. Too busy to bleed? The corner of his mouth twitched. Something like that. She finished cleaning the cut and stepped back. It'll heal fine. Try not to get it dirty. Yes, ma'am. They looked at each other for a moment, and Evelyn felt something shift between them. A recognition of shared exhaustion, shared struggle, shared survival. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. For today. For keeping everyone fed and the kitchen running, it mattered. That's my job. It's more than that. You held things together when everything was falling apart. That takes strength. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She turned away, busying herself with putting away the clean dishes. When she looked back, Caleb was standing. Storm should break by morning, he said again. Then we'll see what needs rebuilding. I'll be ready. He nodded and headed for the door. Before he left, he looked back at her. Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow will be long. You too. After he was gone, she climbed the stairs to her small room and collapsed on the bed, not bothering to undress. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside she felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of belief that she could build something here, that she could belong. The wind howled, the rain pounded, and Evelyn closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, leaving the world waterlogged and exhausted. Evelyn woke to silence, which felt stranger than the wind and rain had. She dressed quickly, her muscles protesting every movement. Yesterday's work had taken more out of her than she'd realized. The cookhouse was cold. She built up the fire, coaxing reluctant flames from damp wood until the stove began radiating heat. Outside, she could hear voices, men assessing damage, calling to each other across the yard. She started breakfast, moving through the familiar routine with hands that knew the work even when her mind was still foggy with sleep. Caleb was first through the door, as usual. The cut on his face looked better this morning, though the bruise around it had darkened to purple. He poured himself coffee and stood by the window, staring out at the muddy chaos of the ranch. How bad? Evelyn asked. Could be worse. Lost about 60 feet of corral fence. Equipment shed roof needs replacing, not just patching. One of the water troughs got crushed by a fallen branch. He took a long drink of coffee. We'll be rebuilding for weeks. The other men filtered in and breakfast proceeded with the usual efficiency. But there was an edge to the quiet this morning, a tension Evelyn couldn't quite identify. She noticed the men glancing at each other, at Caleb, like they were waiting for something. Dutch appeared in the doorway, his arm still splinted and held against his chest with a sling. He looked pale, but steady. Doc said I should be resting, he announced to no one in particular. But I'm not much good at that. You're not much good with one arm either, Caleb said, but his tone was mild. Sit, eat. You can supervise repairs from a chair. Dutch grinned and took a seat. Evelyn brought him a plate, and he thanked her with a nod that held real warmth. After the men cleared out, Dutch lingered. Evelyn started washing dishes, and he sat at the table nursing his coffee. I never properly thanked you, he said, for what you did. You did thank me, several times actually. Yeah, well, I'm thanking you again. Doc said if you hadn't said it when you did, I might have lost the use of it. Bone was bad enough as it was. Evelyn dried her hands and turned to face him. You're welcome. I'm just glad you're healing. Hell of a thing, Dutch continued, having a woman on a ranch like this. Most places won't even consider it. Too much trouble, they say. Women cause problems. Do I cause problems? No, ma'am. That's my point. You just do the work and don't make noise about it. Some of the boys were skeptical at first. Thought Morgan was crazy for hiring you, but you proved them wrong. I'm still proving it every day. Dutch laughed, a rough sound that ended in a wince as he jostled his arm. Ain't that the truth? Out here, you prove yourself every damn day or the land chews you up. He left shortly after, and Luke arrived to help with the midday meal preparations. The boy was even more talkative than usual, full of nervous energy. Did you see the damage? He asked. The corral fence is completely gone on the north side, and there's a tree down by the creek that nearly hit the bunkhouse. Just missed it by maybe 10 feet. We were lucky, Evelyn said. Mr. Morgan says luck is just preparation meeting opportunity, or something like that. I think he read it in a book
This story
once.
was posted on the channel
Evelyn
west
smiled
of
despite
Betrayal.
herself.
Please do not
Does he read
repost
much?
it in any form.
More than you'd think. He's got a whole shelf of books in his quarters. I've seen them when I bring wood. History, mostly. Some philosophy. Poetry, even, though he'd probably punch anyone who mentioned it. The image of stern Caleb Morgan reading poetry was incongruous enough to make Evelyn pause. There were layers to the man she hadn't expected. Most people revealed themselves slowly, in small gestures and unguarded moments. She was beginning to realize that Caleb was no different, just more careful about which moments he let slip. The afternoon was spent preparing food that could travel. Sandwiches wrapped in cloth, hard-boiled eggs, dried fruit. The men would be working straight through, no time to come back for a proper meal. Luke helped her carry the baskets out to where they were rebuilding the corral fence. The scene was organized chaos. Men hauling lumber, digging post holes, measuring and cutting and hammering. Caleb stood in the middle of it all, directing the work with quiet authority. He'd stripped down to his shirt despite the cold, sleeves rolled up, and his hands moved constantly, pointing, adjusting, demonstrating. "Food's here," Luke announced. Work stopped immediately. The men descended on the baskets like starving wolves, grabbing sandwiches and eating while they stood. Evelyn hung back, watching them refuel. This was ranch life at its most basic. Work until you dropped, eat enough to keep moving, work some more. Caleb took a sandwich but didn't eat right away. He walked over to where Evelyn stood, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "You didn't have to bring it out yourself," he said. "I wanted to see the damage. It's not pretty. Nothing about ranch life is pretty." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition that they were both people who'd stopped expecting life to be easy and had learned to find satisfaction in survival instead. "We'll have this fixed in a week," Caleb said. "Then we can focus on the shed roof. What can I do to help?" "Keep doing what you're doing. The men work better on full stomachs." One of the hands called for Caleb. Something about a post that wouldn't seat properly. He excused himself and returned to the work. Evelyn and Luke gathered the empty baskets and headed back to the cookhouse. That evening's dinner was subdued. The men were bone-tired, moving slowly, eating mechanically. Evelyn served beef stew she'd had simmering all afternoon, thick with potatoes and carrots, and fresh bread that Luke had helped her knead. The food disappeared quickly, but there was less conversation than usual. After they'd cleared out, Caleb returned. He'd washed up, changed shirts, looked marginally more human. He sat at the table while Evelyn cleaned, and the silence between them felt comfortable. "My wife used to cook," he said suddenly. Evelyn's hands stilled in the wash water. This was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly. She was good at it, better than the ranch cooks we'd had. After she died, I hired someone to take over. But it was never the same. He stared into his empty coffee cup. "I thought maybe that was just how it was. Food is food, fuel, nothing more." "But it's not just that," Evelyn said quietly. "No, it's not." He looked up at her. "You put something into it. Care, maybe. Attention. The men feel it even if they don't say anything." "Your wife, what was she like?" Caleb was quiet for so long Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was careful, like he was picking through memories that still had sharp edges. "Sarah, her name was Sarah. She was strong, stronger than me in a lot of ways. She grew up on a homestead, knew ranch life. Nothing scared her." He paused. "Except childbirth, I think. She never said it, but I could see it in her eyes when her time got close. She knew something was wrong. I'm sorry. It was 10 years ago. You'd think it would hurt less by now." "Does it?" "Some days. Other days it's like it just happened." He stood, picking up his cup. "I should let you finish up." "Caleb." She used his first name deliberately. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded and left without another word. Evelyn finished the dishes, her mind turning over what he'd shared. Everyone on this ranch was running from something, he'd said. She understood now that he was running from grief that had no finish line, no end point where the pain finally stopped. She understood that better than most. The next few days fell into a pattern. Wake, cook, clean, cook again. Watch the men rebuild what the storm had broken. Listen to Luke's endless chatter. Notice the small ways the crew was starting to relax around her. The occasional joke, the thank you that didn't sound forced, the extra moment spent lingering over coffee. Dutch's arm was healing well. He'd taken to sitting in the cookhouse for an hour or two each day, claiming he was supervising, but mostly just keeping Evelyn company. He told stories about his years on the ranch, about cattle drives and winter storms, and the time a mountain lion got into the chicken coop. "You ever think about leaving?" Evelyn asked him one afternoon. "Every winter," Dutch said honestly, "when my bones ache and the work feels too hard, but then spring comes, and I remember why I stay." "Why?" "Because there's nowhere else I'd rather be." That probably sounds crazy to someone like you, educated and refined, but this land, it gets in your blood. You either love it or you leave. There's no middle ground. Evelyn thought about that while she kneaded bread dough. She'd arrived at Iron Ridge out of desperation, with no love for the land or the work. But something was changing. She was starting to understand the rhythm of this place, the harsh beauty of it, starting to see why men like Dutch stayed despite the difficulty. One morning, almost 2 weeks after the storm, Caleb asked her to walk with him after breakfast. They crossed the muddy yard to where the new corral fence stood, posts straight and rails secure. "We finished it yesterday," he said. "Thought you might want to see." "It looks good." "It'll do." He rested his hand on the top rail. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Evelyn's stomach tightened. This was it. Something had gone wrong. She was being let go. She'd failed somehow without realizing it. "The owner of the ranch is coming in 2 weeks," Caleb continued. "He lives in San Francisco, only visits once or twice a year. He'll want to see the books, inspect the property, make sure everything's running properly." "All right." "He's particular about things, expects high standards. I need everything to be perfect when he arrives." "I understand." Caleb turned to face her. "I'm not worried about the work. The men will perform. The ranch is solid. But he'll be staying for 3 days, taking meals here. I need to know you can handle it." Relief flooded through her. This wasn't about her failing. This was about trust. "I can handle it," she said. "He'll expect better than everyday ranch fare. Not fancy, but better." "How much better?" "Roast beef instead of stew, proper desserts, coffee that doesn't taste like mud." Caleb looked uncomfortable, like discussing food quality embarrassed him. "I can get whatever supplies you need from town. Make me a list of what he likes. I'll manage the rest." "I don't know what he likes. I just know he complains when things aren't right." Evelyn thought for a moment. "Give me money for supplies. I'll plan menus for 3 days and you can approve them. If anything needs changing, we'll have time to adjust." Caleb nodded slowly. "That works. I'll ride to town tomorrow. You can come with me. Pick out what you need." "I can give you a list. You should come. See the town. Get out of the ranch for a day." "When's the last time you left this property?" Evelyn realized she hadn't left since the day she arrived. 6 weeks, maybe more. Time had blurred together in the routine of work. "I suppose I could use a few personal items," she admitted. "We'll leave at first light. It's a 4-hour ride each way, so we'll be back before dark." That night, Evelyn lay awake planning menus in her head. Roasted chicken for the first night. Simple, but impressive if done right. Beef roast the second night with roasted vegetables and gravy. For the third night, maybe pork chops with applesauce and fresh rolls. She'd need better flour, real butter, eggs that were actually fresh, not the ones they got sporadically from the ranch's few chickens. And desserts. She'd need to think about desserts. Apple pie, maybe. Or a pound cake with berry compote. She fell asleep thinking about measurements and baking times, her mind already working through the logistics of impressing a man she'd never met, but who apparently held her future in his hands. The ride to town started in darkness. Caleb had a wagon ready, 2 horses hitched and stamping impatiently in the cold morning air. Evelyn climbed up to the seat, grateful she'd worn her heaviest shawl. The temperature had dropped overnight and her breath came out in white clouds. Caleb drove in silence for the first hour. The road was rough, more of a trail than anything else, winding through forest and across open grassland. The sun came up slowly, painting the mountains pink and gold. It was beautiful in a way that made Evelyn's chest ache. She'd forgotten what beauty looked like. Her last year had been all gray skies and closed doors. "You're quiet," Caleb said eventually. "Just thinking." "About the menus?" "Among other things. They passed a homestead, small and rough, with a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney. A woman stood in the doorway watching them pass, and Evelyn wondered what her story was.
This story was
How
posted
she'd
on the
ended up
channel
here.
west of Betrayal.
Whether she was
Please
running
do
from
not
something
repost
or
it in
toward
any
something.
form.
How long have you been foreman? Evelyn asked. 12 years, started as a hand, worked my way up. The previous foreman retired and the owner asked if I wanted the job. Did you? Didn't think I did, but it turned out I was good at it. Organizing work, managing men, seeing what needed doing before it became a crisis. He glanced at her. What about you? You ever work before your husband died? Not for money. I managed the household, entertained his business associates, did all the things a proper wife was supposed to do. Sounds suffocating. Evelyn laughed, surprised by his bluntness. It was, but I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was lucky. Were you? In some ways, he wasn't cruel. He didn't beat me or gamble away everything we had. He just wasn't there. Not really. Even when he was in the room, he was thinking about business, about money, about everything except me. Caleb nodded like he understood. My father was like that. Worked himself to death trying to prove something, never quite figured out what. And you ended up doing the same thing. Maybe, but at least I know what I'm working for. What's that? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I don't know anymore. It used to be building something with Sarah. A life, a future, kids running around. After she died, it was just motion. Keep moving so you don't have to think too hard. That's not much of a reason. No, it's not. They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Less guarded, more honest. Redwood Crossing wasn't much of a town. A wide main street with buildings on both sides, most of them weathered wood with fading paint. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a small church with a crooked steeple. People moved along the boardwalks with purpose, no one dawdling in the cold. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the general store. Take your time. Get whatever you need. I'll be at the feed store down the street. Evelyn climbed down and entered the store. It smelled of flour and coffee and pickles, a combination that was somehow comforting. The proprietor, a round man with impressive mutton chops, looked up from his ledger. Help you, ma'am? I need supplies for the Iron Ridge Ranch. I have a list. She spent the next hour selecting items, examining produce, testing the freshness of eggs, negotiating prices. The proprietor was curious about her. A new face in town always generated interest, but he was polite about his questions. You're the new cook out at Iron Ridge? I am. Heard you're doing a good job. Dutch came in last week, arm all splinted up, wouldn't stop talking about how you set his bone. Said you probably saved his arm. The doctor did most of the work. Don't be modest. Word gets around out here. People know quality when they see it. Evelyn packed her purchases into crates, and the proprietor helped her carry them to the wagon. Caleb appeared a few minutes later loading his own supplies, feed, tools, rope, a dozen other items the ranch needed. You get everything? He asked. More than enough. Your owner better appreciate good food. He will. Or at least he won't complain, which is close enough. They stopped at a small restaurant for lunch, a plain building with checkered tablecloths and the smell of frying meat. Caleb ordered steak and potatoes. Evelyn got soup and bread, not very hungry, but wanting to try something she hadn't cooked herself. This is strange, she said. What? Sitting in a restaurant, having someone else serve me. I haven't done this in, I can't remember how long. You should do it more often. On what I'm paid? Not likely. Caleb set down his fork. About that. I've been meaning to talk to you about your wages. You're doing more than basic cooking. You handled that emergency with Dutch. You kept the place running during the storm. You're preparing for the owner's visit. That's worth more than what we agreed on. I'm not complaining. I know, but I am. Effective immediately, your pay is going up by 20%. And if this visit goes well, I'll talk to the owner about making it permanent. Evelyn stared at him. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You've earned it. She didn't know what to say. The extra money would make a real difference. She might actually be able to save something, have a small cushion against disaster. Thank you, she said finally. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. They finished eating and started the long ride back. The afternoon sun was warm despite the cold morning. and Evelyn found herself relaxing into the wagon seat, watching the landscape roll past. Caleb pointed out landmarks, a creek where they sometimes fished, a ridge where mountain lions had been spotted, the boundary line between Iron Ridge and the neighboring ranch. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Evelyn asked, the same question she'd asked Dutch. "Every year," Caleb said. "Usually in February when the snow's deep and I can't feel my feet. But I never do." "Why not?" "Same reason as everyone else who stays. This land gets in your blood. Stupid as it sounds. It doesn't sound stupid. Give it time. You might feel differently when you've spent a winter here." They arrived back at the ranch just as the sun was setting. Luke rushed out to help unload supplies, chattering about a horse that had gone lame and a supply shipment that had arrived and 1,000 other small dramas of ranch life. Evelyn carried her purchases into the cookhouse and began organizing them. Fresh butter, real sugar, quality flour, dried fruit, spices she hadn't had access to before. She could work with this. She could make something impressive. Caleb appeared in the doorway as she was putting away the last of the supplies. "Need any help?" "I'm almost done." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Today was good. Getting out, seeing the town. I forget sometimes that there's a world beyond this ranch." "So do I." "We should do it again sometime, when things slow down." Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the suggestion. Was he asking her to go to town with him again? As what? A work obligation or something else? Before she could figure out how to respond, he'd pushed off from the doorframe. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing for the owner's visit." He left, and Evelyn stood alone in the cookhouse, her mind racing. Something was shifting between them, something she didn't quite know how to name. Friendship, maybe? Or the beginnings of something more complicated. She pushed the thought away. No point in speculating. She had work to focus on, a reputation to build, an owner to impress. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Caleb had looked at her across the table in town. Like he was seeing her as more than just the hired cook. Like he was seeing her as a person with a past and maybe, possibly, a future. The next morning, she threw herself into preparations with fierce concentration. She tested recipes, adjusted seasonings, made sure every detail was perfect. The men noticed the change in the food, richer gravies, better bread, meals that had an extra layer of care, but they didn't complain. Dutch watched her work one afternoon, his arm out of the sling now but still moving carefully. "You're nervous," he observed. "I want everything to be right." "It will be. You're a hell of a cook, Evelyn, better than any we've had." "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness. It's fact." He shifted in his chair. "Can I give you some advice?" "Of course." "The owner, Mr. Harrison, he's not a bad man, but he's particular. Likes things a certain way. Don't take it personally if he criticizes. That's just how he is. I'll keep that in mind. And don't let Morgan get too tense about it. He always does when Harrison visits. Gets all wound up trying to make everything perfect." Evelyn smiled. "I've noticed he's been a little more intense lately." "Intense is one word for it. I'd say borderline unbearable, but I like my job too much to say that out loud." The days before the owner's arrival passed in a blur of preparation. Evelyn cleaned the cookhouse until it gleamed. She organized her supplies with military precision. She made trial runs of each menu, adjusting and perfecting until she was satisfied. Caleb checked on her constantly, asking if she had everything she needed, if there were any problems, if she was confident about the meals. She reassured him each time, though privately she was just as nervous as he was. The night before Mr. Harrison's arrival, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She ran through the menus in her head, checking for anything she might have forgotten. The roasted chicken was straightforward. The beef roast would require careful timing. The pork chops were the wild card, easy to overcook, difficult to make interesting. She was still awake when she heard footsteps on the porch. A soft knock on the cookhouse door. She pulled on her robe and went downstairs. Caleb stood outside, looking as tired as she felt. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Neither could I." "Can I come in?" She stepped aside and he entered. They stood in the dark cookhouse, moonlight filtering through the windows. "I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong," Caleb said. "What if the roof leaks during his visit? What if one of the horses goes lame? What if the food is bad?" Evelyn finished. "I wasn't going to say that." "But you're thinking it." "No." He turned to face her. "I'm not. I trust you, Evelyn, completely. You're the one thing I'm not worried about. The words hung in the air between them. Trust. It was such a simple word, but it carried
This
weight.
story was posted
Evelyn
on the
realized
channel
she
west
trusted
of
him
Betrayal.
too. Trusted him
Please
to
do
be
not
fair, to
repost
be
it
honest,
in any
to see
form.
her as more than just hired help. Thank you, she said quietly. I should let you sleep. Caleb. She stopped him before he could leave. It's going to be fine, all of it. We've prepared everything we can. The rest is just doing the work. He nodded, and she saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. You're right. I know you're right. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. He left, and Evelyn climbed back upstairs. This time, she fell asleep almost immediately, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. She dreamed of the ranch, of the cookhouse, of Caleb standing in the doorway, watching her work. In the dream, he smiled, a real smile, not the careful half-expressions he usually allowed himself. And for some reason, that made all the difference. Morning arrived with the kind of clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real. Evelyn woke before dawn and dressed quickly, her hands steadier than she'd expected. The nervousness was still there, coiled tight in her stomach, but it was manageable. She'd faced worse than an owner's visit. She'd faced losing everything and starting over with nothing. This was just cooking. The cookhouse was cold and dark when she descended the stairs. She lit the lamps first, then the stove, building the fire carefully until flames caught and held. Coffee went into the pot, biscuits into the oven. She worked through the morning routine with extra attention to detail, making sure everything was perfect, even though Mr. Harrison wouldn't arrive until afternoon. The men came in for breakfast quieter than usual. They knew what today meant, understood that the ranch was being evaluated. Even the loudest among them ate without their usual banter. Caleb looked like he'd slept even less than she had, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight with tension. Eat something, Evelyn told him, setting down a plate. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway, you'll need it. He picked up a biscuit and ate mechanically, not tasting it. She wanted to tell him to relax, that everything would be fine, but she knew from experience that those words never helped. People had to work through their own anxiety in their own way. Luke burst through the door mid-morning, breathless and excited. Wagon coming up the road. Must be Mr. Harrison. Caleb stood immediately. All right, everyone knows what to do. Dutch, you and Tom finish with the north pasture fence. Luke, make sure the stable's clean. The rest of you, business as usual. Don't stand around gawking. The men scattered. Caleb turned to Evelyn, and she saw the question in his eyes before he asked it. I'm ready, she said. I know you are. He left, and Evelyn took a deep breath. The chicken was already prepared, sitting in a brine she'd started last night. Vegetables were peeled and ready. The table was set with the ranch's best dishes, which weren't much, but at least they matched. Everything that could be done in advance was done. Through the window, she watched the wagon pull up to the main house. A man climbed down, tall and well-dressed in city clothes that looked completely out of place against the rough backdrop of the ranch. He wore a proper suit, a hat that hadn't seen a day of honest work, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned things. Caleb met him, shaking hands, gesturing toward the buildings. They walked together, Harrison examining everything with a critical eye. Evelyn couldn't hear their conversation, but she could read Caleb's body language, tense, formal, the easy confidence she'd seen in him replaced by something more guarded. She turned away from the window and focused on her work. The chicken needed another hour in the brine, then careful drying before roasting. She'd make the gravy fresh, use real butter for the vegetables, ensure every element came together at exactly the right time. Lunch was simple, sandwiches for the crew, nothing special, but dinner would be her test. The afternoon crawled by. She heard Harrison's voice occasionally, drifting across the yard as Caleb showed him the repairs from the storm, the new corral fence, the equipment shed with its new roof. Once, they passed close enough to the cookhouse that she caught fragments of conversation. Expenses seem high for basic maintenance. Storm damage was extensive. We couldn't avoid. Expect better cost management, Morgan. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She didn't like this man, hadn't even met him, but she didn't like the way he talked to Caleb. Like the foreman was a servant being scolded rather than a person who'd kept this ranch running through disaster. At 4 o'clock, she started the chicken. It went into the oven golden and perfect, skin already crisping. She prepared carrots and potatoes, green beans with bacon, rolls that filled the cookhouse with the smell of fresh bread. The gravy came together smooth and rich, seasoned carefully, tasted and adjusted until it was exactly right. By 6, everything was ready. The table looked better than it ever had. Real napkins she'd borrowed from the main house, serving dishes arranged properly. Even wildflowers Luke had picked and put in a jar as a centerpiece. It wasn't fancy by city standards, but for a ranch cookhouse, it was impressive. Caleb appeared at 6:15 with Harrison in tow. The owner stopped in the doorway, surveying the space with those critical eyes. Evelyn stood by the stove, wiping her hands on her apron, refusing to look nervous even though her heart was pounding. "Mr. Harrison, this is Evelyn Hart, our cook," Caleb said. Harrison nodded. "Mrs. Hart?" "Mr. Harrison, welcome to Iron Ridge." "Thank you." He moved to the table and sat without waiting for invitation. Caleb took the seat across from him, and Evelyn began serving. The chicken came out first, carved into perfect portions. Then the vegetables, the rolls, the gravy boat passed between them. Harrison ate in silence for the first few minutes, and Evelyn busied herself at the stove, pretending not to watch. "This is good," Harrison said finally. "Better than the last time I was here. What was his name, Pete?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "He left several months ago." "Good riddance. The man couldn't cook to save his life." Harrison took another bite. "Where did you find Mrs. Hart?" "She answered our advertisement." Harrison glanced at Evelyn. "Where are you from, Mrs. Hart?" "Pennsylvania originally, but I've been moving west for some time." "Husband?" "Deceased." "I see." He returned his attention to his plate. "Well, you're a significant improvement over Pete. This chicken is actually edible." Evelyn wasn't sure if that was meant as a compliment, but she accepted it as one. "Thank you, sir." The meal continued with sporadic conversation, mostly Harrison asking Caleb questions about ranch operations, expenses, productivity, projections for the next season. Caleb answered everything clearly, confidently, but Evelyn could see the strain in his posture. When they finished, Harrison leaned back in his chair. "I assume there's dessert?" "Apple pie," Evelyn said, bringing it to the table. She'd made it that afternoon using the dried apples in her mother's old recipe. The crust had turned out perfectly golden, flaky in a way that required the right touch and the right temperature. Harrison took a bite and actually smiled. "Excellent. You're quite talented, Mrs. Hart." "Thank you." After they left, Evelyn sagged against the counter, exhausted. The first test was done. 2 more dinners to go. Luke came in to help with dishes, full of questions about what Harrison had said, whether he'd liked the food, what Caleb had told him about the ranch. Evelyn answered as best she could while scrubbing plates. "Mr. Morgan looked nervous," Luke observed. "He was nervous. I've never seen him like that. Usually nothing bothers him." "Everyone has someone they answer to," Evelyn said. "Even Caleb." That night, after Luke left and the cookhouse was clean, Evelyn climbed to her room and sat on the bed without undressing. Her hands ached from the day's work, and she was so tired she could barely think. But there was satisfaction there too. She'd done well. Harrison hadn't complained, had even offered something close to praise. She was almost asleep when she heard footsteps on the stairs. A soft knock on her door. "It's me," Caleb's voice. She opened the door. He stood in the narrow hallway, still fully dressed, looking wrung out. "I shouldn't be up here," he said. "It's not proper." "Since when do you care about proper?" "Since I'm trying to keep my job." But he didn't leave. "I wanted to thank you. The dinner was perfect. Better than perfect." Harrison was impressed, and that man is never impressed. He seemed satisfied. He was more than satisfied. He actually complimented the food. In all the years I've known him, I've never heard him compliment anything. Caleb rubbed his face. "I was worried he'd find fault with everything. The repairs, the expenses, the way we're managing the herd, but the meal, it put him in a good mood, made him more receptive to everything else. So your job is safe. For now." He smiled, tired but genuine. "Thanks to you." "I just cooked dinner." "You did more than that. You gave me leverage." He hesitated. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another test." "What's he doing tomorrow?" "Inspecting the cattle, reviewing the books, probably finding a dozen things to criticize. But at least he'll do it on a full stomach." After he left, Evelyn lay in bed thinking about the way he'd smiled. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less burdened. She wondered how often he smiled like that, whether Sarah had been able to make him smile, whether he'd forgotten how until tonight. The second day of Harrison's visit started with more tension. Caleb and the owner rode out early to check the herd, leaving the ranch hands to manage the usual work. Evelyn prepared
This
lunch,
story was
roast
posted
beef
on the channel
sandwiches
west
with
of
horseradish,
Betrayal.
potato
Please
salad,
do not
pickled
repost it
vegetables,
in any form.
and had it ready when they returned. Harrison ate in the main house this time, and Evelyn didn't see him until dinner. But she heard things. Overheard conversations as men passed the cookhouse. Harrison questioning expenses, demanding explanations for routine costs, suggesting the ranch could be run leaner. Dutch appeared mid-afternoon, his arm moving more freely now. "Harrison's in a mood," he announced. "What kind of mood?" "The kind where he thinks he knows better than everyone else. He's been tearing into Morgan about winter feed costs, like we're supposed to let the cattle starve to save money." "Caleb can handle it?" "Maybe, but it's wearing on him. Harrison's got this way of making you feel like everything you do is wrong, even when you've been doing it right for years." Evelyn understood that. She'd had a husband who'd done the same thing, found fault in everything she did while contributing nothing himself. The memory made her work harder on dinner preparation, determined to give Caleb at least one thing that wouldn't be criticized. The beef roast was massive, seasoned with salt and herbs, seared until the outside was dark and crusty. She'd started it early, letting it cook slow until the meat was tender enough to pull apart with a fork. The vegetables roasted alongside it, carrots and potatoes and onions caramelizing in the drippings. By 6 o'clock, the cookhouse smelled incredible, rich and savory, the kind of smell that made people hungry even if they'd just eaten. Evelyn made gravy from the pan drippings, thick and dark, adjusted the seasoning one final time, and waited. Harrison and Caleb arrived exactly on time. The owner looked less satisfied than he had the night before, his expression critical as he surveyed the table. But when Evelyn served the roast, carved into thick slices that showed the perfect pink center, he nodded approval. "This looks acceptable," he said. Acceptable. Evelyn bit back a response. She'd worked for hours to make this meal perfect, and acceptable was the best he could offer. They ate in near silence. Harrison focused on his food with the intensity of someone evaluating every bite. Caleb looked exhausted, eating without really tasting, clearly still dealing with whatever criticism he'd endured all day. "The ranch is running adequately," Harrison said finally, "though there's room for improvement in several areas." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "Your expenses are too high. I understand the storm caused damage, but some of these costs seem excessive. We needed quality materials for the repairs. Cheap lumber wouldn't have held up." "Perhaps, but I expect better cost management going forward." Harrison took another bite of roast. "At least the food has improved significantly. That's one less expense to worry about." Evelyn felt her temper flare. One less expense, like she wasn't standing right there, like she wasn't a person who'd worked herself raw to make this meal. "Mrs. Hart is paid fairly for her work," Caleb said, his voice careful but firm. "She's earned every cent." Harrison looked up, surprised by the defense. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise. I merely noted that having a competent cook is more economical than going through incompetent ones every few months." "She's more than competent," Caleb continued. "She's kept this operation running smoothly through a difficult period. The men are healthier, morale is better, we've had fewer complaints and less turnover. That has value beyond what shows up in the books." Something shifted in Harrison's expression. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. "You're quite loyal to your staff, Morgan." "I'm loyal to people who do good work." The rest of the meal passed without incident. Harrison complimented the dessert, pound cake with berry compote, and left in a marginally better mood than he'd arrived in. After he was gone, Caleb remained at the table while Evelyn cleaned up. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. "Yes, I did." "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Because he was wrong, and because you've been working yourself to exhaustion for his visit. The least I could do was make sure he understood your value." "My value." Evelyn set down the plate she was washing. "I'm not a commodity, Caleb." "I know that, but Harrison sees everything as assets and expenses." "I was speaking his language." "And what language do you speak?" He looked at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken but clear. "I don't know anymore, but I'm trying to figure it out." She went back to washing dishes, and he stayed until she finished. They walked out together into the cool evening air, standing in the yard under a sky full of stars. "One more dinner," Caleb said. "Then he's gone." "Can you make it that long?" "Have to. Though I'm tempted to tell him what I really think about his cost management ideas." "What do you really think?" "That he's never spent a winter on a ranch, never had to make decisions about whether to feed cattle or save money, never looked into the eyes of a horse that needs care and decided it's worth the expense." Caleb's voice was tight with frustration. "He sits in San Francisco counting money and thinks he understands what it takes to keep this place running." "Why do you stay?" "Because the alternative is working for someone else who's probably worse. At least Harrison leaves me alone most of the year." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets, distant horses, wind moving through the trees. Evelyn felt the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones, but she didn't want to go inside yet. There was something peaceful about standing here with Caleb, not talking, just being. "My husband used to criticize everything I did," she said suddenly. "The way I managed the house, the meals I prepared, the people I invited to dinner. Nothing was ever quite right. I spent years trying to please him, and it never worked. What changed? He died. And I realized I'd wasted all that time trying to be what he wanted instead of figuring out what I wanted." She looked at Caleb. "I'm not doing that again. Not for Harrison, not for anyone." "Good, you shouldn't. But I'll cook him one more perfect meal. Not because he deserves it, but because I deserve to prove I can." Caleb smiled. "That's the right reason." The third day of Harrison's visit was the longest. Evelyn woke with a headache, the kind that sat behind her eyes and made every sound too loud. She forced herself through the morning routine, preparing breakfast for the crew, cleaning up, starting preparations for lunch. Harrison spent the morning in the main house reviewing financial records with Caleb. Evelyn could see them through the window, bent over ledgers, Harrison's finger jabbing at numbers while Caleb explained something. The tension was visible even from a distance. Luke came by mid-morning with news. "Mr. Morgan looks ready to murder someone," he reported cheerfully. "Harrison's been questioning every expense for the last 6 months. Even complained about how much we spend on horseshoes." "Horseshoes?" "Apparently we're supposed to let the horses go barefoot and risk them going lame." Luke shook his head. "City people don't understand anything." Evelyn agreed, but kept her opinions to herself. She had pork chops to prepare, a meal that required perfect timing. Too short in the pan and they'd be raw, too long and they'd be tough. She'd made a sauce with apples and onions, sweet and savory, that would complement the meat if everything came together right. The afternoon passed in careful preparation. She made fresh applesauce, not too smooth, with chunks of apple and a hint of cinnamon. Rolls were kneaded and set to rise, vegetables were cleaned and chopped. Everything moved like clockwork, the kind of routine she could almost do in her sleep. At 5 o'clock, the door burst open. Harrison strode in, his face flushed with anger. Caleb followed, his expression carefully neutral but his jaw so tight Evelyn thought he might crack a tooth. "Is dinner ready?" Harrison demanded. "In about an hour," Evelyn said. "Make it 30 minutes. I want to leave before dark." "The food needs time. 30 minutes, Mrs. Hart. I don't have all evening." He left. Caleb remained looking at Evelyn with something close to apology in his eyes. "Can you do it?" he asked quietly. "I'll have to." The next 30 minutes were chaos. Evelyn increased the heat under everything, cooked faster than she should have, rushed through steps that needed care. The pork chops went into the pan too soon, the sauce wasn't fully reduced, the rolls weren't quite risen enough when she put them in the oven. Luke appeared and helped without being asked, moving dishes, setting the table, doing whatever she needed. At exactly 30 minutes, Evelyn had food on the table. It wasn't perfect. The pork was slightly tough, the sauce too thin, the rolls a bit dense. But it was edible, and that would have to be enough. Harrison sat down and ate quickly, barely tasting the food. Caleb picked at his meal, clearly having lost whatever appetite he'd started with. The silence was oppressive, filled with unspoken tension. "The ranch is acceptable," Harrison announced halfway through the meal. "Barely. I expect to see significant improvement in costs by my next visit." "Understood," Caleb said. "Your efficiency is lacking, Morgan. This operation should be leaner, more profitable. You're too soft on the men, too willing to spend money on unnecessary items." "Everything we spend is necessary." "That's a matter of perspective. My perspective is that you're wasting resources." Evelyn saw Caleb's hands tighten on his fork, saw the muscle in his jaw jump. saw him holding back words that would probably cost him his job. With respect, sir, Caleb said carefully, I've kept this ranch profitable for 12 years. Through droughts and storms and economic downturns, the expenses you're questioning are the reason we're still operating. Your loyalty to your
This
methods
story
is
was
admirable,
posted on the
but
channel
misguided.
west of Betrayal.
Perhaps you need fresh
Please do not
perspective.
repost it in any form.
Perhaps you need to spend more than 3 days a year here before questioning how I run things. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Evelyn froze mid-movement. Luke, carrying a water pitcher, stopped in his tracks. Harrison set down his fork slowly. Excuse me? You heard me. Caleb's voice was steady now, past the point of caution. You sit in your office in San Francisco and make decisions about a place you don't understand. You question every expense without understanding why those expenses exist. You treat this ranch like a numbers game instead of recognizing that it's land and animals and people who work themselves into the ground to keep it running. I own this ranch, Morgan. That gives me the right. Ownership gives you responsibility. You've abdicated that responsibility by staying away and then showing up once a year to criticize everyone who actually does the work. Harrison stood, his face red. You're fired. Fine. Evelyn's heart dropped. Luke made a small sound of distress. Harrison looked startled, like he'd expected Caleb to back down. Fine, Harrison repeated. You heard me. I'm tired of working for someone who doesn't respect the work. I'll pack my things tonight. You can't just... I can. And I am. Caleb stood, looked at Evelyn. I'm sorry. I should have controlled my temper. He left. Harrison stared after him, then at Evelyn, like she could explain what had just happened. Mrs. Hart. Excuse me, she said, and followed Caleb out. She found him in the yard, standing in the same spot where they'd talked the night before. He looked furious and relieved at the same time, like he'd been holding something in for too long and finally let it out. That was stupid, he said when she approached. Maybe. I just lost my job, my home, everything I've built here. Was it worth it? He thought about that. Yeah, it was. Evelyn stood beside him, looking out at the ranch, the buildings they'd repaired after the storm, the corral fence he'd rebuilt, the land he'd cared for year after year while Harrison counted money in a distant city. What will you do? She asked. I don't know. Find another ranch, I guess. Start over. Will they give you a reference? Probably not, he laughed, bitter. I've made a real mess of things. Behind them, the cookhouse door opened. Harrison stepped out, and they both tensed. But the owner didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. Morgan, he called. A word. Caleb walked back slowly. Evelyn stayed where she was, watching. She couldn't hear what they said, but she could see Harrison's posture change, become less rigid. Could see Caleb listening, arms crossed, face skeptical. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then Harrison nodded and went back inside. Caleb returned to where Evelyn waited. I'm not fired, he said. What happened? He apologized. Actually apologized. Said I was right, that he's been too hands-off, too critical without understanding the reality of ranch operations. Caleb shook his head. I don't think I've ever heard him apologize for anything. So you still have your job? For now, he's giving me more autonomy, fewer restrictions on how I manage expenses. Said he trusts my judgment. Caleb looked stunned. I can't believe that actually worked. Sometimes people need to be told the truth. Yeah, and sometimes that gets you fired. They walked back to the cookhouse together. Harrison was sitting at the table, working through the meal slowly now, like he was actually tasting it. Mrs. Hart, he said when they entered, I owe you an apology as well. I was rude, demanding, and disrespectful of your work. This meal is excellent, even prepared under unreasonable time constraints. Thank you, sir. I'd like to offer you a raise, 25% increase, effective immediately. You're clearly an asset to this ranch. Evelyn glanced at Caleb. He nodded slightly, encouraging. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I'm already receiving fair compensation. Harrison looked surprised. Morgan gave you a raise? 2 weeks ago. He recognized the value of my work without being asked. I see. Harrison studied Caleb with something that might have been respect. You've built a good team here, Morgan. People who are loyal, competent, willing to stand up for what's right, that's rarer than you think. I know. Don't lose it. Harrison finished his meal and prepared to leave. His wagon was packed, his bags loaded. The sun was setting as he climbed aboard, painting the mountains gold and red. I'll return in 6 months, he told Caleb, and I expect to see this ranch running exactly as you see fit. No more questioning every decision. You've earned that trust. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. The wagon pulled away, disappearing down the road. Caleb stood watching until it was out of sight, and Evelyn stood beside him. That was unexpected, she said. All of it was unexpected. He turned to her. I meant what I said, about standing up for what's right. You did that too, turning down his offer. That took courage. I don't need his money. I have enough. Most people never have enough. Most people don't know the difference between enough and more. They went back inside. The cookhouse was a mess from the rushed meal, dishes piled everywhere. Luke appeared to help clean up, and Dutch came by with a bottle of whiskey. Heard you told Harrison where to stick it, Dutch said to Caleb, pouring drinks. Something like that. About time someone did. They sat around the table, the 4 of them, drinking whiskey and trading stories about the visit. The tension that had filled the cookhouse for 3 days was finally gone, replaced by something lighter. Relief, maybe. Or the satisfaction of having survived a test. When Dutch and Luke finally left, Evelyn and Caleb remained. The whiskey had made her warm, relaxed in a way she hadn't felt in months. I thought I'd lost everything today, Caleb said quietly. This job, this place. The only home I've had since Sarah died. But you didn't. No. I got it back. Or maybe I got something better, the freedom to run this place the way it should be run. He looked at her. And I have you to thank for that. I didn't do anything. You've done everything. You kept this place running, impressed Harrison, gave me the confidence to stand up to him. Caleb reached across the table, took her hand. I don't know what I would have done without you here. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, rough and work-worn, both of them. This wasn't romance, wasn't the start of some grand love story. It was something simpler and maybe more real. 2 people who'd found their way to the same place and discovered they worked well together. I'm glad I'm here, she said. So am I. They sat like that for a while, holding hands across the table, not needing to say anything else. Outside, the ranch settled into evening quiet. Inside, something new was beginning. Not perfect, not smooth, but real and worth building on. The weeks after Harrison's departure felt different. Lighter somehow, like the entire ranch had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Caleb moved through the days with less tension in his shoulders, made decisions without second-guessing himself, even smiled occasionally when he thought no one was watching. Evelyn noticed all of it. She noticed the way he lingered in the cookhouse after meals, helping with tasks he didn't need to help with. The way he asked her opinion about things that had nothing to do with cooking, whether they should move the cattle to the south pasture, how to handle a dispute between 2 ranch hands, what supplies to order from town. He treated her like someone whose judgment mattered, and that was new, unfamiliar, good. One morning in late October, she woke to find the world transformed by the first real frost. Everything glittered white and crystalline in the early light, beautiful and harsh at the same time. She dressed in extra layers and went down to start the fire, her breath visible in the cold air. The stove was being stubborn. The wood was damp from the temperature change, and the kindling kept sputtering out before catching properly. She was on her 3rd attempt when Caleb walked in, earlier than usual. Having trouble? He asked. The wood's not cooperating. He knelt beside the stove and rearranged the kindling, creating better airflow. This time the fire caught and held. Evelyn felt oddly irritated that he'd succeeded where she'd failed, which was ridiculous. Fire didn't care about pride. Thanks, she said. Winter's coming early this year? Caleb stood, brushing soot from his hands. We'll need to prepare. Extra firewood, additional supplies before the roads get too bad. How bad do they get? Bad enough that we can be cut off for weeks at a time. Last year we were snowed in for almost a month. The thought of being trapped here with these men for a month made Evelyn's stomach tighten. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of responsibility. A month of cooking without fresh supplies, without break, without any margin for error. What do you need me to do? She asked. Make a list of everything you'll need. Double what you think. We'll go to town next week and stock up. The men started coming in for breakfast, and the conversation ended. But throughout the day, Evelyn found herself thinking about winter, about being isolated here with snow piling up outside and nowhere to go even if she wanted to leave. It
This
should have
story
felt
was posted
claustrophobic.
on the channel
Instead,
west of
it felt
Betrayal.
almost secure,
Please do not repost
like having a
it
place
in
to
any
weather the
form.
storm instead of facing it alone. She was washing vegetables that afternoon when Dutch appeared, looking troubled. His arm was mostly healed now, back to full use, but he still favored it slightly when he thought no one was watching. "Can I talk to you about something?" he asked. "Of course." He shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncomfortable. "It's about Luke." Evelyn set down the knife she'd been using. Luke had been quieter than usual the past few days, less enthusiastic about his work. She'd noticed but hadn't wanted to pry. "What about him?" "His mother's sick, real sick. He got a letter yesterday from his sister. She's asking him to come home, help take care of things." Dutch rubbed the back of his neck. "But he doesn't want to leave. Says the ranch needs him, that he can't abandon his job." "Where's home?" "Oregon. 3 days' ride, maybe more with winter coming." Evelyn thought about Luke. Young, earnest, always trying to help, always working harder than necessary to prove himself. Of course, he'd feel torn between responsibility to family and responsibility to the ranch. "What do you think he should do?" she asked. "Go home. Family's family. The ranch will survive without him." Dutch looked uncomfortable. "But he respects you, listens to you. I thought maybe if you talk to him, you want me to convince him to leave?" "I want you to help him see that it's okay to leave, that doing right by his mother doesn't make him a quitter." Luke came in an hour later to help with dinner preparations. He moved through his tasks mechanically, none of his usual energy. Evelyn worked beside him in silence for a while, waiting for the right moment. "Dutch told me about your mother," she said finally. Luke's hand stilled in the dishwater. "He shouldn't have. He's worried about you." "I'm fine." "Are you?" Luke pulled his hands out of the water and dried them roughly on a towel. "She's been sick before. My sister panics over everything. It's probably nothing. Or it's something and you should be there." "I can't just leave. Mr. Morgan depends on me. You depend on me. Who's going to help with the wood and water? Who's going to—" "Luke." Evelyn touched his arm gently. "We'll manage. Your mother won't." "You don't understand. I finally have a place here. People who need me. If I leave, you can come back. What if I can't? What if winter hits and I'm stuck in Oregon? What if Mr. Morgan replaces me?" Evelyn understood the fear underneath the words. Luke had found belonging here, same as she had. Leaving felt like risking that belonging, like it might disappear if he turned his back even for a moment. "Caleb's not like that," she said. "He values loyalty. Going to take care of your mother is the most loyal thing you can do to yourself, to your family. He'll respect that." Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "What if she dies while I'm traveling there? What if I'm too late? What if you're not? What if your being there makes all the difference?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the tears. "I don't want to leave you all alone in the kitchen. I managed alone before you got here. I'll manage again." That night at dinner, Luke asked to speak with Caleb. The entire crew fell silent, listening as the young man explained about his mother, about needing to go home, about hoping his job would still be here when he returned. Caleb listened without interrupting. When Luke finished, the foreman nodded once. "When do you need to leave?" "Tomorrow if I can. The roads will only get worse." "Take 2 horses. Sell one when you get there if you need money. Come back when your family situation is settled, whether that's a week or 6 months. Your job
This
will be
story
here."
was posted on
Luke
the
looked like
channel
he might
west
cry
of
again.
Betrayal. Please
"Thank
do
you,
not
sir.
repost it in any
Don't
form.
thank me. Just take care of your mother." The next morning, Evelyn packed enough food for Luke's journey to last him several days. Bread, dried meat, hard cheese, apples. She wrapped everything carefully and handed it to him along with a canteen she'd filled with coffee that was still hot. "Travel safe," she said. "I will." Luke hesitated, then hugged her quickly. "Thank you for everything." She watched him ride out, leading the second horse behind him. The ranch felt emptier after he left, even though it was just one person gone. That evening, she had to haul her own water and firewood, and the work took twice as long without his help. Caleb found her struggling with a particularly heavy bucket. "Let me," he said, taking it from her. "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." He carried the bucket inside and set it where she needed it. Then he brought in wood, stacking it neatly by the stove without being asked. Luke did this every day? Caleb asked. Twice a day, usually. I'll assign someone to help. Tom, maybe. He's good with tasks like this. I don't need Evelyn. He looked at her steadily. You're already doing the work of 2 people. You don't need to prove you can do 3 people's work. Let me help you. She wanted to argue, to insist she could handle it alone. But exhaustion was already settling into her bones, and Luke had only been gone 1 day. Winter was coming, with all its additional demands. Pride was expensive, and she couldn't afford it. All right, she said. Thank you. Tom started helping the next day, a quiet man in his 40s who did the work efficiently and left without lingering to chat. It wasn't the same as having Luke's enthusiastic company, but it was help, and Evelyn was grateful for it. The week passed quickly. Evelyn made lists of supplies, checking and rechecking, trying to anticipate what a month of isolation might require. Coffee, flour, sugar, salt, lard, dried beans, rice, cornmeal, molasses, canned goods if they could get them, dried fruit, nuts, anything that would keep. The morning they were set to leave for town, Evelyn woke to find snow falling. Not the light dusting they'd had before, but real snow, thick flakes that fell steadily and covered everything. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Caleb already in the cookhouse, staring out the window. We need to leave now, he said, before this gets worse. They took the wagon, loaded with empty crates to fill with supplies. The ride to town was miserable, cold and wet, the snow coming down so hard at times that Evelyn couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Caleb drove with fierce concentration, keeping the horses steady on a road that was rapidly disappearing under white. They made it to Redwood Crossing just before noon. The town looked deserted, everyone sensible staying inside by their fires. The general store was open, and the proprietor looked relieved to see customers. Thought I might have to close early, he said. Storm's getting bad. We need supplies, Caleb said, enough to last through winter. The proprietor's eyes lit up. This was the kind of sale that made the difference between a good month and a bad one. He helped them gather everything on Evelyn's list and more. Extra flour when she saw they had quality stock, real coffee beans instead of the cheap blend, butter and eggs and bacon. While they were loading the wagon, Caleb disappeared for a few minutes. He came back carrying something wrapped in brown paper. What's that? Evelyn asked. Nothing. Personal item. She didn't push. Everyone was entitled to privacy. The ride back was worse than the trip out. The snow had intensified and wind drove it sideways into their faces. The horses struggled and twice Caleb had to get down to clear snow from the wheels. Evelyn tried to help, but he ordered her to stay in the wagon. One of us freezing is enough, he said. By the time they reached the ranch, both of them were soaked through and shivering. The men rushed out to help unload the supplies, and Dutch insisted on taking care of the horses while Caleb and Evelyn got inside to warm up. Evelyn's hands were so cold she couldn't feel her fingers. She stood by the stove, trying to thaw out, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. Caleb appeared with blankets, wrapping one around her shoulders. You need to change clothes, he said. You're soaked through. So are you. I'll survive. Caleb. She looked at him, saw the ice in his beard, the blue tinge to his lips. We both need to change. Go. I'll make coffee when I come back down. He left reluctantly. Evelyn climbed to her room and stripped off her wet clothes, her fingers clumsy with cold. She dressed in dry layers, as many as she could fit, and went back downstairs to find Caleb doing the same, adding wood to the fire, setting coffee to boil, moving through tasks that would generate warmth. They stood by the stove together, warming their hands, not talking. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the cookhouse was an island of heat and light against the dark. That was stupid, Caleb said finally. We should have left earlier, or waited until tomorrow. We needed the supplies. Not badly enough to risk getting stuck in a blizzard. Evelyn poured coffee for both of them, and they sat at the table. Her hands were starting to work properly again, sensation returning in painful tingles. Thank you, she said, for getting us back safely. I'm the one who put us in danger. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. The storm got worse faster than anyone expected. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. You always do that. Do what? Give people the benefit of the doubt. See the best in situations instead of dwelling on mistakes. I've made enough mistakes to know
This
that beating
story was
yourself up over
posted
them
on the
doesn't
channel
help
west
anything.
of Betrayal.
What does help?
Please do not
Learning
repost
from
it
them,
in any
doing better
form.
next time. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, the same gesture from weeks ago, but different now. More certain, less accidental. I'm glad you're here, Evelyn. I'm glad I'm here too. They sat like that while the storm howled outside and the fire crackled in the stove. Evelyn thought about how far she'd come from that first day, desperate, uncertain, willing to do anything to avoid being thrown back into poverty. She'd found more than a job here. She'd found purpose, community, maybe even the beginning of something she was afraid to name. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled up until the ranch was nearly buried, drifts reaching halfway up the cookhouse walls. The men couldn't work outside, so they huddled in the bunkhouse or the main building, restless and irritable from forced inactivity. Evelyn kept them fed, producing meals that were more elaborate than usual, just to give herself something to do. Roasts and stews and fresh bread, desserts she hadn't attempted before. The men appreciated it, their moods improving with each good meal. Caleb spent most of those 3 days in the cookhouse. He helped with tasks he'd never helped with before, washing dishes, kneading dough, even attempting to make biscuits under Evelyn's instruction. His first batch came out hard as rocks, and he threw one at the wall in frustration. They're not that bad, Evelyn said, trying not to laugh. They're terrible. They just need practice. I'll stick to ranch work, thanks. But he tried again the next day, and the second batch was better. Still not good, but edible. He looked so pleased with himself that Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest. On the third night, after the men had eaten and left, Caleb pulled out the brown paper package from the trip to town. He handed it to Evelyn without ceremony. What's this? Open it. She unwrapped the paper carefully. Inside was a shawl, soft wool in deep blue, finely made, warmer than anything she owned. She stared at it, not quite able to process the gesture. You were shivering the whole ride back, Caleb said, and your shawl was falling apart. I thought you could use a new one. Caleb, this is too much. It's a shawl. It's more than that. She ran her fingers over the wool, feeling the quality of it. This had cost real money, more than he should have spent on something for her. Why? Because I wanted to, because you work hard and deserve nice things, because... He stopped, looking uncomfortable. Because I care about you, and I don't want you to be cold. Evelyn wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. It was perfect, warm and soft, and exactly what she needed. But more than that, it was proof that someone had noticed, had cared enough to do something about it. Thank you, she said quietly. You're welcome. They stood there at the warm cookhouse with snow falling outside and something unspoken building between them. Evelyn knew they were approaching a line, the kind that once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. She'd been a widow for over a year, and in that time she hadn't thought about wanting anyone, hadn't had the space in her life for anything beyond survival. But now, looking at Caleb with his work-roughened hands and his careful eyes and his gift of a simple shawl, she felt want stirring. Not just physical want, though there was some of that, but wanting to build something, wanting to stop being alone, wanting to see if two broken people could make something whole together. Caleb, she started, then stopped. Couldn't find the words. I know, he said. I feel it too. What do we do about it? I don't know. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. I haven't felt
This
this
story
way
was
since
posted
Sarah.
on the channel west of
Didn't think I
Betrayal.
ever would.
Please do
again.
not
It scares
repost it
me.
in any form.
It scares me too. We could ignore it, keep things professional. We could, but I don't want to. Neither do I. He reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. Evelyn leaned into the touch, letting herself want this, want him. When he kissed her, it was tentative at first, questioning. She answered by kissing him back, and tentative became certain. They pulled apart slowly. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. This is complicated, he said. Everything's complicated. The men will talk. Let them. Harrison might not approve. Harrison can mind his own business. Caleb laughed, and the sound filled the cookhouse with warmth. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm practical. There's a difference. No, you're remarkable. They kissed again, longer this time, and Evelyn felt years of loneliness starting to crack and fall away. This wasn't perfect. Neither of them was perfect, but it was real and honest and theirs. When they finally separated, Caleb looked at her seriously. I don't want to rush this. We should take it slow, figure out what we want. Agreed. But I want you to know this isn't casual for me. I'm too old for casual. So am I. Good. He left a few minutes later, and Evelyn cleaned up the cookhouse with hands that weren't quite steady. Her lips still tingled from his kiss. Her heart was beating faster than it should. She felt young and foolish and absolutely terrified. But she also felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The storm broke on the fourth day, revealing a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine and beautiful. The men ventured out to check on the animals, to dig paths between buildings, to assess what damage the storm had caused. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the cookhouse, wrapped in her new shawl, watching them work. Caleb was in the middle of it all, directing the effort, helping dig out the barn. He looked up and caught her watching, smiled in a way that made her stomach flip. Dutch appeared beside her. You two finally figured it out, huh? Evelyn felt her face heat. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't, just like I don't know that Morgan's been mooning over you since about a week after you got here. He has not. He has. Man's been walking around like someone hit him over the head. Rest of us were wondering when he'd work up the nerve to do something about it. Dutch grinned. Glad he finally did. You're good for him. We're taking things slow. That's smart. But don't take them too slow. Neither of you is getting any younger. Evelyn swatted him with her dish towel. Get out of here. Don't you have work to do? Going. But he paused in the doorway. Seriously, though, I'm happy for you both. This place is better when people in it are happy. After he left, Evelyn went back to her work. But she found herself smiling for no reason, humming while she cooked, feeling lighter than she had in memory. That evening, Caleb ate dinner with the crew as usual, but he stayed after everyone else left. They washed dishes together, falling into a comfortable rhythm. The conversation was easy, natural. He told her about the storm damage, minor, mostly just snow to clear. She told him about a letter she'd received from a friend back east, full of gossip about people who felt like strangers now. Do you miss it? Caleb asked. Your old life? Parts of it. Having money, not worrying about where my next meal was coming from. But the rest? She shook her head. No, I was living someone else's life, trying to be what my husband wanted, what society expected. I didn't even know who I was. And now? Now I know exactly who I am. Someone who can cook for 15 hungry men and set a broken bone and survive a blizzard. Someone who doesn't need anyone but chooses to be with people anyway. That's a good person to be. What about you? Do you miss your life before Sarah? Caleb was quiet for a long time. I miss the future we were supposed to have. The kids who never got born, the life we were building. But I don't miss who I was then. Young, stupid, thought I had all the answers. He dried the last plate and set it carefully on the shelf. Losing Sarah taught me that nothing's guaranteed, that you can do everything right and still end up alone. You're not alone now. No. He looked at her. I'm not. They moved to the table and sat, talking until late into the night, about their childhoods, their dreams, their regrets. Evelyn learned that Caleb had wanted to be a teacher once, had gotten halfway through a degree before his father died, and he'd had to take over the family farm. That he loved reading philosophy but pretended not to because the other ranch hands would mock him. That he still dreamed about Sarah sometimes, but the dreams were getting less frequent, less painful. Caleb learned that Evelyn had wanted children desperately, but her husband had kept putting it off, always saying they'd try next year, until next year never came. That she loved cooking but had learned to hate it during her marriage because nothing she made was ever quite good enough. That she'd seriously considered just giving up when the bank took her house, but pride had kept her moving forward. I'm glad you didn't give up, Caleb said. So am I. He walked her to the stairs that led to her room, and they stood in the dim light of the cookhouse, neither wanting to say goodnight. This is still complicated, Caleb said. I know, but I think it's worth it. So do I. He kissed her goodnight, slow and sweet, and Evelyn went upstairs feeling like she was floating. She lay in bed replaying the entire day, thinking about the way he'd looked at her, the things he'd said, the future that was starting to take shape between them. Winter was coming. She'd face it here at Iron Ridge with work that mattered and people who valued her and maybe, just maybe, love growing in the spaces she'd thought were too broken to hold anything new. Outside, the stars shone cold and bright over the snow. Inside, Evelyn pulled her new shawl tight around her shoulders and fell asleep smiling. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to trust. Evelyn had learned not to believe in easy happiness. It always came with a price tag attached. But this quiet contentment with Caleb, this growing thing between them, felt different, earned maybe, built on honest work and honest conversation rather than promises and pretty words. They didn't announce anything to the crew. Didn't need to. The men noticed anyway, saw it in the way Caleb found excuses to be in the cookhouse, the way Evelyn's face softened when he walked in. Dutch made knowing comments. Tom smiled quietly. Even the younger hand seemed pleased, like having two people find each other made the ranch feel more like home and less like just a place to work. December arrived with bitter cold and more snow. The ranch settled into winter routine. Shorter days, harder work, the constant battle against freezing temperatures. Evelyn's world narrowed to the cookhouse and the yard between buildings, paths kept clear by daily shoveling. She didn't mind the isolation. After months of learning this place, these people, she'd found her spot in the ecosystem. She belonged here. One evening, 2 weeks before Christmas, Caleb appeared in the cookhouse after dinner with an odd expression on his face. Not worried exactly, but serious in a way that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong. I need to talk to you about something." They sat at the table and Caleb looked at his hands like he was trying to find the right words. "Harrison sent a letter," he said finally. "He's selling the ranch." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. "What?" "He's had offers before, but he always refused. This time he's accepting. Some company out of Denver wants to buy it, turn it into a commercial operation. Bigger herd, more staff, different management." "When?" "Sale closes in April. New owners take possession May 1st. Evelyn's mind raced. May. That was 5 months away. 5 months before everything changed, before her job disappeared, before she had to start over again somewhere else. "What about you?" she asked. "What about the crew?" "New owners might keep some of us on, or they might bring in their own people. No guarantees either way." Caleb finally looked at her. "I'm sorry. I know you were just starting to feel settled. It's not your fault." "No, but I wish I could fix it." They sat in silence for a moment. Evelyn thought about leaving, about packing her single trunk again, and climbing onto another wagon headed for another uncertain future. The thought made her tired all the way to her bones. "What will you do?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Find another ranch, probably. Start over somewhere else." He paused. Unless what?" Caleb took a breath. "Unless I buy it myself." Evelyn stared at him. "Buy the ranch? I've been saving for years, living cheap, putting away everything I don't absolutely need. I've got enough for a down payment, maybe enough to convince a bank to loan me the rest." He looked uncertain now, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "It's probably crazy. I'd be taking on massive debt, risking everything I have. But this place, it's been my home longer than anywhere else. The idea of walking away, of letting strangers take it over—" "You should do it," Evelyn said immediately. "You think so?" "I know so. You love this land. You know how to run it. And you're the only person I trust
This
not to
story was
ruin what's
posted
already
on the
here."
channel west of Betrayal.
"It would be close.
Please do not
Really
repost
close.
it in any form.
One bad season and I could lose everything. Or one good season and you'd own something real, something that's yours." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "If I do this, if I actually buy this place, I want you to stay. Not just as the cook, as my partner, in the ranch, in everything." Evelyn's heart was beating too fast. "Caleb, I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet, but I'm asking if you'd consider building this with me, making it ours instead of just mine." She thought about it, about the risk, the work, the very real possibility of failure, about trusting someone again after her husband had proven himself unworthy of trust, about letting herself want something beyond simple survival. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." Relief flooded Caleb's face. He squeezed her hand and Evelyn squeezed back. They were doing this, taking the biggest gamble either of them had ever taken, betting on themselves and each other and a future that wasn't guaranteed. I need to go to town tomorrow, Caleb said. Talk to the bank, send a telegram to Harrison with an offer. Do you want to come? Someone needs to feed the crew. Tom can handle it for one day. Evelyn smiled. Then yes, I'll come. They left before dawn, the wagon loaded with nothing but themselves and Caleb's carefully saved money. The ride was cold but clear, the sky that particular shade of blue that only came with winter. Caleb was quiet, lost in his own thoughts, and Evelyn let him be. This was his dream they were chasing. She was just grateful to be part of it. The bank in Redwood Crossing was a small brick building that looked more substantial than it probably was. Inside, a clerk directed them to the manager's office. The manager was a thin man with spectacles and the cautious expression of someone who'd seen too many failed loans. Mr. Morgan, he said, shaking hands, what can I do for you? Caleb laid out his proposal. He had $5,000 saved, a fortune for a ranch foreman, proof of years of disciplined saving. Harrison was asking $20,000 for the ranch. Caleb needed a loan for the difference, secured against the land and livestock. The manager listened, made notes, asked questions about profit margins and expenses and projected income. Evelyn sat quietly, watching Caleb present his case with calm confidence. He knew this ranch inside and out, knew every asset and every risk. If anyone could make it work, he could. It's a substantial loan, the manager said finally. But your savings demonstrate fiscal responsibility, and your track record managing the ranch is impressive. He tapped his pen against his desk. I'll need to review everything with the bank's board. Can you give me a week? I can give you 3 days, Caleb said. After that, I need to know if I should look elsewhere. The manager's eyebrows rose. That's very little time. The seller has other interested parties. I need to move quickly. It was a bluff. Harrison had said nothing about other buyers, but it worked. The manager nodded. 3 days then. I'll have an answer for you. They left the bank and walked to the general store. Evelyn needed supplies anyway, and Caleb wanted to send his telegram to Harrison. While she shopped, he disappeared to the telegraph office. When he returned, he looked simultaneously relieved and terrified. I did it, he said. Sent the offer. Now we wait. They had lunch at the same restaurant where they'd eaten months ago. This time felt different. Less like employer and employee, more like partners planning a shared future. They talked about what changes they'd make to the ranch if the purchase went through. Evelyn had ideas about expanding the kitchen garden, maybe getting chickens for fresh eggs. Caleb wanted to improve the irrigation system, build a new barn to replace the oldest one. We're getting ahead of ourselves, Caleb said. Bank might say no. Bank will say yes. You sound sure. I am. You're a good investment. He smiled at that, and Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest. This man, with his quiet strength and his careful dreams, had somehow become essential to her life. The idea of building something with him didn't scare her the way it should have. Instead, it felt right, like the first thing in years that actually made sense. They returned to the ranch that evening to find the crew anxious for news. Word had apparently spread about the sale, probably from someone in town who'd seen them at the bank. The men gathered in the cookhouse after dinner, waiting to hear what would happen to their jobs, their home. Caleb stood at the head of the table and told them the truth. Harrison was selling. Caleb had made an offer to buy the place himself. They'd know in 3 days whether the bank would approve the loan. If I get it, Caleb continued, nothing changes for you. Same job, same pay, same ranch. If I don't get it, we'll all be looking for work come spring. What about the new owners? Dutch asked. If some company buys it instead? I don't know. They might keep some of you, might clean house completely. The men exchanged worried looks. Jobs weren't easy to find, especially in winter. Most of them had nowhere else to go. I'm betting on you, Morgan, Dutch said. You've been fair to us all these years. If you're buying this place, I'm staying to help you run it. Others murmured agreement. Even the newest hands, the ones who'd only been here a few months, nodded their support. Evelyn felt emotion tighten her throat. These rough men, who showed affection through insults and loyalty through hard work, were choosing to trust Caleb, choosing to believe in a future he was trying to build. The 3 days waiting for the bank's decision were the longest of Evelyn's life. She cooked mechanically, going through motions while her mind spun with possibilities. The loan could be denied. Harrison could reject Caleb's offer even if the bank approved it. The whole thing could fall apart, and they'd be back where they started. Temporary, expendable, waiting for the axe to fall. Caleb handled the stress by working himself into exhaustion. He was out before dawn and didn't come back until after dark, throwing himself into physical labor like it could burn away the anxiety. Evelyn watched him wear himself down and didn't know how to help except to make sure he ate and occasionally forced him to sit still for 5 minutes. On the third day, Caleb rode to town alone. Evelyn stayed at the ranch, unable to concentrate on anything, burning bread she'd made 1,000 times before. The hours crawled by. She watched the road obsessively, looking for the wagon, for any sign of his return. He came back just before sunset. Evelyn saw him from the cookhouse window and knew immediately from his posture. The loan was approved. Relief made her dizzy. Caleb walked into the cookhouse and just stood there, not saying anything. Then he smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his entire face. "We got it," he said. Bank approved the loan. Harrison accepted the offer. "As of May 1st, this ranch is mine." Evelyn crossed the room and hugged him hard. He hugged her back, lifting her feet off the ground, and they stood there holding each other while the enormity of it settled in. "Ours," Evelyn corrected. "You said ours." "Ours," Caleb agreed. That night they told the crew, and the celebration lasted until past midnight. Someone produced whiskey. Dutch played harmonica, badly. Even Quiet Tom sang, his voice surprisingly good. The cookhouse filled with laughter and music, and the kind of joy that came from knowing the future, while still uncertain, was at least in friendly hands. Evelyn stood at the edge of it all, watching these men she'd come to care about, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness, but hope. The belief that things could get better instead of worse, that work and trust and showing up every day actually mattered. Caleb found her in the corner and pulled her into a dance, even though there wasn't really music for dancing. They swayed together awkwardly, and Evelyn realized she was crying. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. "Nothing. Everything's right. That's what's wrong." He laughed and kissed her forehead. "I know what you mean." Winter deepened after that. January came with temperatures so cold that water froze in minutes, and the men had to break ice in the troughs 3 times a day just to let the animals drink. February brought more snow, burying the ranch under drifts that reached the roof lines. But the crew worked together, kept everything running, and looked toward spring with anticipation instead of dread. Luke returned in late February, thinner but smiling, his mother on the mend. He threw himself back into work like he'd never left, helping Evelyn with water and wood and telling stories about Oregon that made her laugh. The ranch felt whole again with him back. Evelyn and Caleb's relationship continued to deepen through those winter months. They were careful about propriety. Separate quarters, no open displays beyond hand-holding, but everyone knew. The crew accepted it without comment, seemed to take it as natural that 2 people who worked well together would eventually want more. One night in March, with spring just starting to show itself in longer days and occasional warm breezes, Caleb asked Evelyn to walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and headed out past the barn, toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch. The moon was full, turning the snow to silver. From this vantage point, Evelyn could see the entire operation, buildings dark against white, smoke rising from chimneys, the mountains standing guard in the distance. "This is mine now," Caleb said quietly. "In 6 weeks, it'll be official, but it's already mine in the ways that matter. It's beautiful. It's a lot of work. That too." He turned to face her. "I told you before that I wasn't ready to ask you to marry me, that we should take things slow."
This story was posted on the
remember.
channel west of
"I've
Betrayal.
changed my mind."
Please do not
Evelyn's breath
repost it
caught.
in any form.
"Caleb, I'm not a romantic man. I don't have pretty words or grand gestures, but I know what I want, and I want you. As my wife, my partner, the person I build this life with." He took her hand. "Will you marry me?" Evelyn thought about all the reasons she should say no. They'd known each other less than a year. She was still healing from her first marriage, still learning who she was outside of that failure. This ranch was a gamble that could fail, leaving them with nothing but debt. But she also thought about the way Caleb looked at her like she mattered, the way he listened when she talked, valued her opinions, trusted her judgment, the way he worked himself to exhaustion for a future he wanted them to share, the way he'd given her not just a job but a home and a purpose and a reason to believe in tomorrow. "Yes," she said, I'll marry you." He kissed her there on the hillside with the moon shining down and the ranch spread out below them. It was cold and awkward and perfect, and Evelyn felt the last pieces of her old life finally fall away. She wasn't running from anything anymore. She was running toward something, toward this man, this land, this life they were choosing together. They were married in April, a week before the ranch officially changed hands. The ceremony was simple, just the crew and a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Redwood Crossing. Dutch stood as witness. Tom played guitar. Luke presented them with wildflowers he'd found pushing up through the last of the snow. Evelyn wore a new dress, pale blue, that Caleb had insisted on buying. She felt pretty in it, which was strange after so many months of wearing only practical work clothes. Caleb wore his best suit, hair slicked back, looking uncomfortable and handsome at the same time. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, about building a life together through good times and bad. Evelyn listened to the words and thought about how different they sounded now than they had at her first wedding. Then, marriage had felt like a prison sentence dressed up with flowers and cake. Now it felt like freedom, the freedom to choose this person, this life, these risks and rewards together. When the preacher asked if she took Caleb as her husband, Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I do." Caleb's voice was steady when he said the same. They exchanged simple gold bands, and the preacher pronounced them married. The crew cheered, and Dutch let out a whoop that probably scared wildlife for miles around. They had a celebration dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. Evelyn had made a cake, 3 layers with jam between them, the kind of thing she'd make for clients back in her old life. The crew devoured it and demanded she make one every week, which made her laugh. Later, after everyone had cleared out and the cookhouse was clean, Evelyn and Caleb walked back to the main house together. Caleb had moved his things from the foreman's quarters to the owner's residence, a modest building that would now be their home. "It's not much," he said, opening the door. Evelyn stepped inside and looked around. 2 rooms, a bedroom, and a sitting area with a small stove. Sparse furniture, nothing decorative, the space of a man who'd been living alone and hadn't seen the point in making it comfortable. "It's perfect," she said. "It needs a woman's touch." "It needs our touch." They spent their first night as husband and wife in that small house, and Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace, maybe, or just the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, they rode to Redwood Crossing together for the final paperwork. Harrison had sent all the documents, and the bank had everything ready. Caleb signed his name a dozen times, and with each signature, Evelyn felt the weight of it, the debt they were taking on, the responsibility, the sheer enormity of owning something this substantial. But she also felt the possibility. This was theirs now, not Harrison's, not the bank's, but theirs to succeed or fail with. Their future to build or destroy. And somehow that felt less terrifying than comforting. They returned to the ranch, their ranch, in the afternoon. Spring was asserting itself now, snow melting in the warmth, grass starting to show green underneath. The cattle were being moved to fresh pasture. Repairs that had waited through winter were finally getting done. May arrived with warm days and cool nights, with work from dawn to well past dusk. Evelyn moved her things into the main house and slowly made it feel like home. Curtains in the windows, a tablecloth on their small table, books on the shelf next to Caleb's collection. She kept cooking for the crew, but now she had help, a young woman from town who needed work and didn't mind the isolation. Her name was Mary, 16 and quiet, daughter of the general store proprietor. She learned fast, worked hard, and was grateful for the opportunity. Evelyn taught her everything she knew about cooking for a crew, about managing supplies, about holding your own in a space full of rough men who didn't always think before they spoke. Training. Mary freed Evelyn to focus on other things. She planted that kitchen garden she'd wanted, put in vegetables and herbs, even a few flowers just because she could. She worked with Caleb on the ranch's finances, learning to read the ledgers, to understand profit and loss, to make decisions about where to invest and where to save. She was learning that partnership meant more than sharing a bed. It meant sharing everything, work and worry, triumph and failure, the boring logistics of daily life. It meant arguing sometimes, compromising often, learning to trust that you were both working toward the same goals even when you disagreed about methods. One evening in June, Caleb came in from checking the herd looking troubled. Evelyn was reviewing supply orders at their small table, and she looked up when she heard his footsteps. "What's wrong?" "Cattle prices are down, lower than I expected." Evelyn's stomach tightened. They'd been counting on decent prices when they sold the herd in fall. Lower prices meant less profit, which meant less cushion against the debt they were carrying. "How much lower?" 20%, maybe more. She set down her pen. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we'll have to be more careful, cut expenses where we can, hope for better prices by September." He sat down heavily. "I knew this was a risk. I just didn't expect it to happen the first year." Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "We'll figure it out." "What if we can't?" "Then we'll figure that out too." They sat together in the fading light, holding hands, facing the reality that success wasn't guaranteed, that wanting something badly didn't make it happen, that sometimes you did everything right and still ended up losing. But they also had options. They could sell some of the horses to raise cash, could delay some of the repairs they'd planned, could tighten their budget even further. It would be hard, but hard wasn't the same as impossible. Over the next months, they worked those options. Sold 3 horses to a neighboring ranch, postponed building the new barn, cut back on everything that wasn't essential. The crew accepted smaller bonuses that year, understanding the situation, willing to sacrifice because Caleb had always been fair with them. By September, when they drove the cattle to market, prices had recovered slightly. Not all the way, but enough. They made their loan payment with a little left over, and Evelyn felt like she could breathe again. "1 year down," Caleb said that night. "Only 19 more to go before we own this place free and clear. 19 years of this, and I'll have gray hair." "You'll have gray hair anyway." She swatted him, and he caught her hand, pulled her close. They'd survived their first year. It hadn't been easy or perfect. But they'd survived together, and that counted for something. The second year was easier. They knew what to expect now, had systems in place, had learned from their mistakes. Prices were better. Weather cooperated. They managed to set aside actual savings, a cushion against the next crisis. Luke got promoted to assistant foreman, taking on more responsibility, growing into a leadership role. Mary turned into an excellent cook, eventually taking over most of the daily meals so Evelyn could focus on ranch management. Dutch's arm healed completely, and he worked harder than men half his age, loyal to the end. Evelyn and Caleb settled into married life with the same practical approach they brought to everything else. They didn't have a perfect relationship. They argued about money, about priorities, about the best way to handle problems. But they also laughed together, supported each other, built something solid out of the raw materials of 2 broken people trying to do better. In their 3rd year, a storm hit that made the one from Evelyn's first months look gentle. It came in October, early for such a severe system, and it lasted a full week. Snow fell so thick they couldn't see more than a few feet. Wind tore at the buildings. Temperatures dropped so low that even the animals huddled close for warmth. The crew worked around the clock to keep everything secure. They moved livestock into sheltered areas, reinforced buildings, kept fires burning in every structure. Evelyn and Mary kept food coming, hot meals at all hours, coffee that never ran out. On the 4th day, disaster struck. The old barn, the one they'd been planning to replace, partially collapsed under the weight of snow. They got the animals out safely, but the building was a total loss. Evelyn found Caleb standing in front of the wreckage, staring at the destroyed barn with his hands clenched into fists. "We can't afford to rebuild right now," he said. "Then we'll make do without it until we can afford it." "That could be years." "So it'll be years."
This
He
story
turned
was
to her,
posted
and she
on the
saw the
channel west
frustration in
of
his face.
Betrayal.
The fear
Please
that
do
one
not
setback would
repost it
cascade
in any
into total
form.
failure. "We've been through worse," Evelyn said. "Remember that first storm? When Dutch broke his arm and Harrison was coming and everything felt impossible? We got through that. We'll get through this too." And they did. They redistributed the livestock to other buildings, worked out temporary solutions for storage, made it work. By spring, they'd saved enough to start rebuilding. Not the old barn, but a new one, better designed, stronger. They built it themselves with the crew's help, and when it was finished, Evelyn stood looking at it with fierce pride. They'd built that. With their own hands, their own labor, their own stubborn refusal to quit. It was more than just a barn. It was proof that they could create something lasting. Time moved faster after that. Seasons blurred together. Summers hot and busy. Winters harsh but manageable. Spring and fall filled with urgent work. The ranch prospered. Not rich, never rich, but solid, profitable, sustainable. They hired more crew as the herd expanded, added a second cookhouse to handle the larger numbers, bought additional land when the neighboring ranch sold out. Evelyn's garden grew until it supplied most of their vegetables through summer and fall. Mary got married to one of the ranch hands and moved into a small house they built for them. Dutch eventually retired, too old for the hard work, but he stayed on the ranch in a small cabin, helping with lighter tasks and generally being the resident source of wisdom and sarcasm. Luke became full foreman when his skills outgrew the assistant role, and he ran the crew with the same fair-minded competence Caleb had shown him. Through it all, Evelyn and Caleb worked side by side, partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through hard times, celebrating small victories. They never had children, too late for both of them, and the ranch took all their energy anyway. But they built something that felt like family out of the crew and the land and the life they'd chosen. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the same hillside where Caleb had proposed, looking out at the ranch in the evening light. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Saying yes to me, to this place, to all of it?" Evelyn thought about the question seriously. There had been hard times, years when money was so tight she'd laid awake at night worrying, moments when she'd been so tired she'd cried from exhaustion, days when the work felt endless and the reward inadequate. But there had also been good times, mornings when she'd woken next to Caleb and felt grateful just to be there, evenings when the crew had gathered in the cookhouse and she'd looked around at all those faces and felt like she belonged, quiet moments working in her garden, or riding across the ranch, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "No," she said. "I don't regret any of it." "Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts. Those are what made it real." Caleb pulled her close, and they stood there watching the light fade over land that was theirs. Not because they'd been given it or inherited it, but because they'd worked for it, fought for it, built something worth having out of nothing but determination and trust. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived, desperate, uncertain, willing to do anything to avoid poverty. She'd come here with empty pockets and a dead husband's debts, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found purpose, community, love, a life that wasn't perfect but was hers, built with her own hands and her own choices. She'd learned that starting over wasn't the end of your story. Sometimes it was just the beginning. That broken things could be mended into something stronger than they'd been before. That having nothing meant you could build anything. That desperation could turn into determination. That the worst thing that ever happened to you might be the thing that saved you in the end. The ranch would outlast them both. Long after they were gone, it would still be here. These buildings they'd repaired and rebuilt. This land they'd worked. This legacy they'd created out of 2 broken lives and 1 shared stubbornness about refusing to quit. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. "Come on," Caleb said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." And they walked down the hillside together toward the lights of the ranch, toward the life they'd built, toward tomorrow and whatever it would bring. Because that's what you did. You kept going, you kept working, you kept choosing each other and the life you wanted to build, one day at a time, until those days added up to something worth having, until you looked back and realized that somewhere along the way, survival had become living, and living had become joy, and joy had become home.